Hello, shortcuts. This is video 2 for shortcuts on July 19th. I'm going to move the PC back a bit because I'm going to need some space to unfurl some posters. This list is classic rock, avant-garde, pop, rock and roll. Yeah. And it has a whole bucket load of records that have never been on shortcuts lists, so I'm going to be quite intrigued as to what you all make of them. And I'm sure there's at least one, if not more, that you will never have heard of. Anyway, I'm going to start things off with 3 records that I'm a fan of that I think are somewhat of a theme. And I'm talking about this period in maybe 69 to 74, 75, where it was perfectly okay, maybe a little bit earlier. One of the records might be a little bit earlier than 69, so let's say 68, where it was perfectly okay to make avant-garde, sometimes comical, sometimes rude, sometimes deliberately challenging music that could be traced back to the blues, and often bands fronted by men who were enigmatic, quirky, sometimes mentally challenged, but creative and driven and genuinely compelling personalities. So who are these 3 people that I'm talking about? Well, actually, one of them is a band that's related to a person who fits that bill. Anyway, it's somewhat tenuous. But let's go with the first record from the list. This is Frank Zappa's Apostrophe. 1974, the follow-up to Overnight Sensation, which was a somewhat loopy, lewd, luscious production really for him. Maybe his 4th or 5th solo record, but he made a bunch of records with the Mothers of Invention. But Overnight Sensation, sarcastically named, but of course it was his biggest hit, and he was so far from an overnight sensation. But Apostrophe, it's pretty much the same band, but I think it takes that lucid but loony approach and condensed it into something that is commercially acceptable but still quirky and funny, without the schoolboy humor that I think, for me, just drags Zappa down. Of course, in saying that, the first song on Apostrophe is Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. So, it's a song about a dog weeing, so it is what it is. But it isn't the scatological and maybe sexually absurd humor that he can sometimes fall into. You've still got Uncle Remus and Stink Bomb and stuff, but it's really, really cool music. The band are extraordinary, and, is Frank Zappa legitimately the most underrated guitarist of all time? I think he's got a case. Now, where do I go? Well, I'm going to go with this next record. This is The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. This is the Japanese hard cardboard first press. Look at that. And even more excitingly, for those of you who care about these things, and I do, so you should too, it's a white label promo. So let's recap that. The Japanese white label promo of The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. Arthur Brown, rather odd individual who, well, the big hit from this record, of course, being Fire, which is a blast of energy, kind of jazzy, soul pop conflagration that, kind of drove them up the charts in the UK. But the record itself is, I think, it reminds me of Apostrophe. That's why I'm describing it. It's psychedelic, weird, funny, sometimes brooding, sometimes a political commentary. It's quite something. And that's never a record I thought I'd be putting on that list. Now, this is the one that I think legitimately no one out there will have heard of. This is Elephant's Memory. Their debut album, not debut album, this is their, I think, third or fourth album from 1972. But I want to draw your attention to this. Can you see that? Produced by John and Yoko. Why is that interesting? Well, it's because Elephant's Memory were John and Yoko's backing band for many of their early 70s efforts. And it was interesting because they're a bit of a bonkers American rock and roll band. This album starts off, kind of flies out the track with the opening song, Liberation Special, and it doesn't really let up. It's super rare. A real Crate Diggers cult classic on hard cardboard gatefold. And that's 3 records that are deeply interesting, deeply flawed in places, but worthy of anyone's collection. And I really love all 3. So now that you've had this triple pill of psychedelic, scatological weirdness, how do I drag you all back in? Well, let's go with this. Notorious. Duran Duran's 4th album. So why, might you ask, am I holding up 2 copies? Well, 2 copies were in the box. And so I want to show you, this is an integrated obi. The obi flows into the record cover. And rather beautiful it is too. But even more excitingly is this. It contains the ultra rare poster from the band, which I think is rather fabulous. Now, I wish that both of these copies had the poster, but only one of them does, and that one is quite a bit more expensive than the other. So you can pick your poison. You can get a beautiful copy of Duran Duran Notorious Songs poster, or with poster, but both of them have the fabulous integrated obi, and they both look immaculate. Now, Duran Duran, named after Barbarella, a character in Barbarella, unashamedly pop melodic 80s, megastars. But what happens when a megastar rock band decides to go disco? This happens. Queen, Hot Space. Without doubt, their weirdest, funniest, most bass-driven record. John Deacon on this record is amazing, which is just weird. Really. This is the Japanese first press, and it comes with all sorts of goodies. There's, lyric sheets and pictures and stuff. But it also has this, which is not typical for Japanese releases because it's subtle and interesting. It's a book. Can you see that? Little book. What the little book with the 4 band members. What the little book does is it folds out into a series of live images and this really interesting little view of their discography. Never seen that before. Anyway, this is a Japanese first press and it is in immaculate condition. And I don't think there's a more fun Queen record out there. Oh, well, maybe A Kind of Magic. It's cut from the same cloth as A Kind of Magic because it's playful, super melodic, and of course, it has Under Pressure. Right up there with their greatest ever songs. I've got a couple of records now, a little bit earlier than Hot Space, not much earlier, a little bit earlier, 1979/1980. But this is a British band and an American band who just went nuts in the studio. They were like, all right, large S, and if we want to get a Goats orchestra in, and we're going to have jugglers and timpanis and whatever we need, that's what's going to happen. And that's when you get records like this. Supertramps, Breakfast in America, and Steely Dan's Gaucho. You have 2 incredible Japanese presses of 2 of the most full-on and expensive and biggest albums of the turn of the decade. 79. Of course, some people aren't aware, but Breakfast in America by Supertramp, they were British and from the north of England, whereas the guys in Steely Dan, Walter Becker and Don Fagan, deep wet Midwestern folks, but they all wanted to expand their minds in the studio, and didn't they do well? I'm talking about expanding minds, and probably the worst segue ever. Here are 2 Beatles records that I've never had on short cuss lists, and you know how many Beatles records I've had over the years. I have never had Yellow Submarine, and I have never had, a little bit glary, the Beatles Rarities. There it is. 2 relatively rare Japanese presses from Beatles records. This Rarities pressing is on, can you see this? The early black Odeon label, and it looks amazing. And similarly, the Yellow Submarine, which of course George Martin had a huge hand in crafting the soundtrack to the Yellow Submarine movie, which was playing in theaters while the band were recording the White Album. It's got some great stuff on it. Anyway, 2 Beatles records that maybe a bunch of you haven't had. And again, looked up the reviews of those, and they're really fabulous. I still have some really cool records to come. What about this? Simple Minds' 4th and breakthrough record, New Gold Dream. This is the Japanese first press of the record that Bono openly admits inspired Unforgettable Fire. This is the record that includes Glittering Prize and Promised You a Miracle. And rather wonderful it sounds too. Here are a couple of 60s records that are with Obi and rather beautiful. The first is the Rolling Stones Metamorphosis. So even though every track on this record comes from the 60s, it wasn't released until the mid-70s. And why was that? Well, it was somewhat of a weird conflagration because Bill Wyman pulled together a series of outtakes all the way back to 1964 from some of their earliest studio recordings, but all the way through, particularly in side 2, to the only ever officially released authorized outtakes of songs from the sessions that produced Let It Bleed and Beggar's Banquet. These are records that have got Mick Taylor on guitar. And you know, this is and that's side 2 of the side 2 of this record, I think, is up there with anything the Rolling Stones ever produced. And look at that sleeve, Metamorphosis, playing off the novel from the time. Yeah, really odd compilation record that in its own way is rather wonderful. First time on the shortcuts list, as is this. So this is Cream's fourth and final record. Jack Bruce, Eric Clapton saying goodbye once and for all. And why do I love this pressing so much? Well, because it's the Japanese first press, as is always the case, they do something special. So there's the hardcore cardboard inner. But this is wonderful. There's each track on its own headstone, because of course they knew this was goodbye to Cream, the final album. And then the lyrics in this most psychedelic setting. The Clapton and Bruce. Yeah, this is Goodbye Cream. And the funny thing, they released this record and they thought, we should probably put a single out. And the single they put out was Badge, which was an all-time classic. And the segue between this record and the next record is that this album is a mixture of live and studio recordings, as does this. Now, this record is a guilty pleasure of mine. This is Flowers of Evil by Mountain. 1/2 hard cardboard gatefold, 1/2 live in the studio, 1/2 live in the studio, 1/2 in the studio, 1/2 live. And interestingly, it also comes with a book. And that book has got a bunch of photos and little, the full lyrics of the story, which you can translate, but also these amazing montages of the band at the time. If you don't know Mountain Flowers of Evil, it's a cult favorite now. And this pressing is, the Japanese first pressing, is really hard to get because it sounds bloody amazing. So, there you go. Now we've got 3 records to go and they could not be more different. I always ask for a copy of this, the Led Zeppelin 1 on Japanese pressing. Now this one, P8041A, I don't know if I know this one, but I will do some research and give it a listen before Wednesday. And then 2 records to go. One is one of the greatest records of the 80s, All Mod Cons by The Jam. This record was a stellar step forward for the band. David Watts in the crowd, and my personal favourite, Down in the Tube Station at Midnight. I have replaced all of my Jam records with Japanese pressings because they are far superior, particularly Bruce Foxton's bass, which sounds unbelievable. All right, now we have one more to go, and what a package this is. So we have Chicago 5, hard cardboard gatefold that looks pretty much like a series of wooden planks. Why that was decided to be the theme, I don't know. We've got the Obi from the first press, but the action's only beginning. You've got further inserts. You've got this. Now, I have never seen anything like this. I'm going to see how I can demonstrate this. But it's like a fold-out. It's about 3 meters wide of pictures and stories from the band, discographies, and various other things. One side and the other. And it's got a poster. And the poster is massive. So let's get this and show you it. There we go. Oh my gosh. Don't want to rip it. That would be a shame for it to come halfway around the world and not survive its first interaction with me. Here we go. Look at that. Crazy. Man, sometimes these Japanese first presses are just off the charts. Now, I am not a Chicago knowledgeable person in any way, but I have looked up the stack ranking of Chicago's multiple records, 12, 14 of them, and this record is regularly in the top 2. So it has something going for it. And this package is amazing. And they really didn't charge me very much at all for it. So someone is going to get a bargain. Now there's how you have a classic rock, new wave, pop list. I hope you enjoyed that. And I'm very curious to see what you all pick on Wednesday night. Price list goes out Wednesday 9 p.m. Please leave comments. Please subscribe. It's very, very nice when you do that. It repays the effort. And we'll see you all sharp 9 p.m. Wednesday. It's going to be very, very interesting. Thanks a lot.